I wondered about, you know, when what do you want me to tell Romney? I can't tell him to do that. Can't do that to himself. You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy.
That was Clint Eastwood speaking to Invisible Obama Thursday night. And that was the Republican Party totally missing the irony of a white man rendering a black man invisible. But at least Clint was acknowledging the invisible man. One look around the audience, the RNC, made it immediately apparent which Americans the Republicans were speaking to. And the invisible Americans they seemed incapable of seeing. Back with me are Nancy Giles and Bob Franken, and joining them now are Monica Mehta, author of the forthcoming book, The Entrepreneurial Instinct, and David Coates, a political science professor at my alma mater, Wake Forest University. It's lovely to have to have you here. So I got to say, I felt like I was having a college moment. So I've pulled out my Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and I thought this moment captured exactly the thing that I find so anxiety-producing. Whatever critiques you might have of President Obama, whenever he tells the story of America, nobody's invisible, right? There's women there, there's men there, there's workers there, there's enslaved people. Like, when he tells the story, it gets to be everybody's story. And over again, they kept rendering invisible everybody else's contributions, and then literally made the president into the invisible man. I mean, I'm sorry. Am I having like an academic overreading of this, or was this?
No. I mean, yes, one thing that. Well, look, we've got a party that appeals to 0% of the African American population. Zero. Yeah. They managed to pull a few people that do support them. That was kind of interesting eye candy.
Right, 0 is a percentage, not a count.
No.
I mean, there are some actual black Republicans.
Right, I know. And I saw some of them on your show last week, as a matter of fact. I found it just so sad and depressing. Just on first talking about Clint Eastwood, I've worked with him. He's an incredible filmmaker. He's always had more than integrated cast. He's always had African American actors in prominent roles in all of his movies. He's very loyal to his crew. I worked with him a while ago. It's been like 15 years, but this guy just looked kind of like sad and sort of out of it and sort of unkempt, and just on the basis of him representing himself, I was disturbed.
Yeah, and so let me push this a little bit, because I don't want to make a claim that Mr. Eastwood is himself, you know, harboring racial bias or anything.
That he is, yeah.
But more that there's like this, that there's something missing in what happens when you represent the President of the United States in that way. Let's even take the idea that we are somehow less safe in the world. This kind of discourse that was coming up from Condi Rice and from John McCain, that felt to me in the sort of thing that would be policed out of a Democratic convention. Like, you're not allowed to show up and say, oh, you know, we're much more vulnerable now, we're much less safe than we once were.
I thought there was an extra element to the Eastwood presentation that actually it spoke to that soft birtherism that was been around all week. I think that Barack Obama is not one of ours. You know, he just doesn't get it. And the party took on this role as the carrier of the American dream, the carrier of American exceptionalism, as though the rest of us are not. Yeah. And then started to say, well, actually, he doesn't get it, and by implication, presumably lots of Democrats don't get it.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think we're connecting a lot of dots that shouldn't necessarily be connected. I think Clint Eastwood very clearly has a history, if you look at this man, of being one that is civil to people of all different backgrounds. And, you know, I just thought that this was an eccentric speech. I thought it was one that was entertaining, and I thought it was one that was meant to rile the population. But to go further and say that there's racial undertones here that we should all be upset about, I didn't connect those dots at all.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think Monica makes the great point. I think what we really had here was Clint Eastwood's shtick. Not only that, but there's nothing original about that. Every campaign has an ad with an empty chair depicting the opponent. What I found ironic is that they were touting this Mitt Romney, who is supposed to be so distant. So you had an empty chair promoting the candidacy of an emotional empty suit. And I just believe that it was awkward. I believe it shows that the smart staff people can make mistakes. They don't like to admit it because they get paid a lot of money not to. But it was just one of those things that gave us something to talk about. But
well,
it was really plenty to talk about.
Let me ask about this something to talk about, because it also seems to me that in addition to being sort of upstaged by an empty chair, that Mitt Romney was consistently getting upstaged by the various people who were meant to be introducing him. Let's just take a quick moment to listen to Chris Christie and his speech on the same night that Ann Romney spoke.
They said it was impossible. This is what they told me. To cut taxes in a state where taxes were raised 115 times in the 8 years before I became governor. We did it. They said it was impossible to speak the truth to the teachers union. For the first time in 100 years, with bipartisan support, you know the answer. We did it.
Right, so, but the we there has nothing to do with Mitt Romney.
It was really, I did it. It was all about Chris Christie. He's my governor.
And good for him. Why not? He should tout that. Like,
you know what?
But
he's
standing
a
up.
transitional figure. They're actually getting lined up for 2016. They kept forgetting to mention him till the last 5 minutes of their presentation.
But the party is not one person. It's a group of people, and this is a moment to build unity and excitement, and I think he was very successful in doing that.
Well, the one thing he wasn't successful in doing, though, was promoting Mitt Romney. I mean, he waited until, I think, 16 minutes in before he even mentioned his name. It was so self-promoting. And I have to just say that Chris Christie, to me, is the best advertisement for anti-bullying legislation. Because the guy, he's my governor. He's a total bully.
I heard
it's interesting that he would use the word truth. I mean, it was the kind of truth that George Orwell wrote about with the Ministry of Truth. They were basically presenting, quote, truth and presenting lies at the same time.
Well, let me push on this truth question, because we did hear that from Christie. We heard it from Ryan, also this idea that, like, we're the people who will tell you the hard truth, but then also said, but don't worry, we're not going to be sort of dominated by fact checkers, right? That's not going to be central to what we're doing.
Well,
here.
what's the old adage? You know, a politician's lying when his lips are moving. So, I mean, I think this is something that if we're going to talk about politicians not telling the truth, this happens on both parties across the aisle.
It is more. It really is more than that. I mean,
way more.
It's funny to find out in the news this morning that Paul Ryan lied about his marathon time, right? That's kind of funny, and sort of why would he do that when he knows that there is, the internet? But it's not funny when they say things like, Medicare is being, raided, when in fact the Ryan plan is the one that would turn it into vouchers. It's not cute or just sort of normal politics to suggest that the president has a welfare policy that he doesn't have. Those things are inaccurate.
I'm sorry to jump in. I've got to say, I really don't appreciate when you've got all these lies on the one side, and I've heard not only you say this, but other people say this, that, oh, both sides lie. Both sides, it's a false equivalency. These are bold-faced, like, huge lies. The thing about the plant that...
A bold-faced lie to somebody like me is saying that this president is pro-small business. I mean, that's my wheelhouse, and I look at small business owners today.
We're going to go straight to your wheelhouse as soon as we get back, because there was a promise of 12 million new jobs. Monica, I want to ask you whether or not that was just a falsehood or whether or not that's reality, and I'm going to let you in on this one.
Thank you.
We're back, and we're talking about the issue of honesty at the Republican National Convention. So I wanted to let you in on this, because I thought you had a really smart insight about this fact-checking question.
We need to go deeper than just the individual lies, because people can pursue those. Why are they lying all the time? I think there's a basic flaw in their strategy. They're saying two things which are not easy to square. One is America's the most exceptional and brilliant country on earth, and by the way, you ought to get rid of Obama because we've got a trade deficit, we've got skill deficits, we've got poverty and unemployment. The only way they can square those two is to say all those problems arose under the Obama presidency alone, whereas in fact most of them built up, of course, under George W. Bush, and they're out there saying let's go back to the kinds of programs that Paul Ryan supported and George W. Bush canvassed. So they have the basic truth they're trying to sell, it's all Obama's fault, is actually a lie. And so in order to cover the lie, they have to lie and lie and lie and lie. There's going to be lies from here to November, because if they talk the truth and said, well, actually, the mess was created by the policies we're now proposing to reintroduce, of course, it wouldn't go down very well in Peoria. I think that's the strategic area that the Democrats need to go for. Don't pursue every lie. Let the fact checkers do that. Ask why they need to lie at all.
Yeah, it does feel like the sort of, the pursuing each and every one begins to make you look petty, right? This is the advice your parents give you. Don't fight with a person who is irrational, because from a distance, you can't tell who's rational and who's not. Monica, I do want to ask you about this and whether or not this is allowed. Let's just hear Romney's fundamental promise, the one thing he said he would do. Let's listen to this.
I have a plan to create 12 million new jobs. Paul Ryan and I have 5 steps.
All right, so 5 steps, 12 million new jobs. Look, is that true?
We have not heard enough from anyone to be able to support a claim like we're going to be able to create 12 million new jobs. But I think the issue is far simpler than all of this. We have a jobs problem. The economy is the #1 issue for most people. And the president who's sitting in office today has not prioritized jobs in the economy. In his first term in office, in the first 2 years, he controlled both the House. He had the support of the legislature. And did he prioritize jobs in the economy? No, he prioritized universal health care, a very important issue, but frankly not the #1 issue, and it still stands today.
So I want to take just a quick look at data on this, because the fact is that since 1948, just the reality is that since 1948, income grows for everybody except the top 5% at a much higher rate when a Democratic's president. Period. Like, it's just, you know, I mean, I'm not quite sure what to do with that except to say, there's the facts. When a Democratic's president, if you are in the 95%, you are likely to see income growth. And I don't know how to square that with, I believe that businesses create jobs, not government, but elect me to the head of government so I can create 12 million jobs.
You square it partly by pointing out that the projections are that 12 million new jobs will be created regardless of any policy change. So he's not making a pitch that isn't going to happen anyway. And the other thing is to point out that we've had 2 growth periods in the post-war years. One was Democratic-led up to '73, when income inequality came down and wages rose because of strong trade unions in the Northeast and so on. And we've had the Reagan one since, where inequality's grown, outsourcing's gone on, the guy in the big office has taken all the money. That came to bits in 2008. We've got to find a third growth model. That's what the problem is.
So is that right? Are we going to have 12 million jobs? And so what he's doing is basically going out to the horizon at 6 a.m. and going, rise, sun, rise. And then the sun rises?
All of the rhetoric is totally ignorant of the fact that over the last 40 or 50 years, we've seen a completely different nature in terms of how people get access to capital. Debt has gone all over the place. It's become so easily accessible to most people, and a lot of Americans don't know what to do with it. It helps to fund our lives, but it's grossly complicated our lives as well, and it's completely left out of the conversation.
Yeah, well, he says they have a 5-step program, and it's nice to see that he and Paul Ryan are part of a 5-step program. But beyond that,
12-step program.
That's right. But beyond that, quite frankly, 5 steps isn't going to cut it. #1. #2, some of the steps that we know about are going to be horribly destructive to the economy, up to and including the tax cuts that they're talking about. That fits into the Ministry of Truth kind of approach to things. But lastly, what they are doing, and you just mentioned a fact, shame on you. We're not going to let that dictate the campaign after all that they say. And this is just classic political demagoguery when they say, if you don't like what you see in the mirror, break the mirror. That's what they're doing now by trying to give a partisan sheen to anybody who has the audacity to present facts.
Well, the other thing is that there was a jobs bill that the president introduced that was rejected by, you know, the Republicans, I think 16 times. Was it that? And sometimes not even allowed to get to the floor.
Well, here's another fact. Raise the taxes. Raise the taxes on the wealthy. What are you really going to get? You're going to get has $700 billion. We've got a $16 trillion debt. What are we doing for the 93% that's left?
Yeah, but
what are we doing?
Well, what we do know is that cutting the taxes at the top will undoubtedly increase the deficit.
But we're running different kinds of debts together. We've got federal debt, we've got international debt, and we've got personal debt. Personal debt built up in the Reagan years because people weren't allowed, their wages didn't rise except for a little time in the late 90s. So people maxed out their credit cards. That hangs like a load now on this economy, and we can't get out of it. And actually, we've got massive international debt as well.
And up next, I want to talk about one other issue, and that was how Mitt Romney, in presenting himself, dealt with the faith factor on Thursday night. We're going to dissect the M word just a bit.